Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down the X-Files. We are now at season 4, and this is one of the show's most ambitious and emotionally charged outings. Airing on Fox on the 4th of October 1996, it ran all the way until the 18th of May 1997. Clocking in at 24 episodes, it continued the golden age that started with season 3. This season actually peaked with 29 million viewers, which came with the episode Leonard Betts. That was an entry in which Scully was diagnosed with cancer, and these plot lines made the show become an absolute phenomenon. During this time as well, showrunner Chris Carter was pretty much given the green light for anything, and it's around this time that he started to develop Millennium. Because of this though, his time was split between this and that, which led to the writers taking on more of the reins. And it definitely feels like it paid off. In our earlier breakdowns, you might remember how he talked about how Glenn Morgan and James Wong left, and that was to work on Space Above and Beyond. However, unfortunately, that got cancelled, but fortunately, it gave them the opportunity to return to the show. With Darren Morgan, Vince Gilligan, and a well-versed team, they built an empire with several Emmy nominations and lots of controversy as well with the episode Home. But people couldn't get enough, and it was during this time they also got a green light on making a feature film. That will of course come after season 5, but it's safe to say they were just hitting home run after home run with Home. Now, episode 1 continues things from that cliffhanger finale, and I did feel like last video, I kind of recapped way too much of season 2 to open up season 3. So yeah, there's a big breakdown of where we left things off if you need a refresher. Quickly though, where we ended things was with Mulder meeting with Scully and Jeremiah Smith, who was an alien healer who'd been breaking the rules. He'd stepped in and against orders been healing humans from mortal wounds, which meant the guy had to go. The season ended with the alien bounty hunter showing up to kill him, and he and Mulder then fled. Title Herrenvolk, this is a word that means master race in German, which evokes feelings of Nazi eugenics. Now though, we ended things on a big cliffhanger, mate. Where we start, it's kind of a cold opening. In it, we join a telephone repairman who's up a pole fixing some shit. All of a sudden, a blonde-haired kid appears looking up at him, and then more and more identical-looking kids appear around him. Bit weird, but he just brushes it off as there being lots of kids that look alike. All of a sudden, though, the guy's stung by a bee and he falls to the ground dead while the kids calmly look at him. Now this was achieved because the kids were twins, and they then doubled up their shots using motion tracking technology to have the camera moving in the same direction on each take. It's very Village of the Damned, and plays in the big killer bees conspiracy that existed in the 90s, which will come back later in the season. According to the wiki though, thousands of live bees were used in the episode, and they were told that the guys wouldn't sting if the queen wasn't present. However, that theory time was debunked, with lots of the actors getting stung throughout the scenes. Ever the professional though, they kept stum and carried on with the scene and didn't say anything until the scene was finished. Even the kids. Now from here we catch back up with the agents and see as Mulder begs Smith to heal his mother. They then lead the bounty hunter through the site where Mulder manages to stab him in the back with the alien needle, which I've learned since the last video is called a stiletto. He and Smith then flee, but the bounty hunter comes back to life and grabs Scully. He demands to know where the pair are heading, but ends up sparing her when he realises the lass hasn't got a clue. But Mulder and Smith are safe for now, and they debate whether saving Tina is the right thing to do. Now we kind of touched upon it last breakdown, but a lot of this arc kind of tackles duty and loyalty. For example, Smith should be loyal to his species, but he feels it's his duty to help people, even if it kind of goes against his kind in the syndicate. Mulder also has to decide whether helping his mother's the logical thing to do, even though he should be loyal to her. His duty calls for him to protect Smith though, and they know that returning to the hospital will put him in danger. So they decide not to go and instead steal a car and head to Canada. It's kind of a sort of an escort episode, but it does have some very big reveals. Anyway, at the hospital we see the smoking man and the first elder from last season who isn't too happy with Tina the tobacco lover. Here's the photos that X took of the pair meeting, and they know that there's a leak in the organization. The bounty hunter also gets Scully to call Mulder to ask where he is, and after learning, he heads after them. What kind of kills me about this scene though is that as soon as he leaves, Scully immediately tells Mulder that he's heading up to get them. Like he's not even out of earshot and she's on the phone like, oh mate, yeah, he's coming, make sure you set up a trap and shit. Returning to the FBI, she then meets with Skinner and Pendrell, with her learning that the other Smiths have disappeared. She also contacts X and learns that the government's smallpox eradication program is tied to the alien hybrids. Now, you might remember the filing cabinets from last season, which had the names of everyone who'd been vaccinated kept on file, and it's kind of building off that. This has been a way to catalogue humans and build towards the colony the aliens and government are planning on creating. X also tells her that Mulder's mother's in danger, but this is a ruse by the Syndicate. Due to them knowing there's a leak, they've basically decided to flood information through the organization, and whatever gets out there will obviously indicate who's been running against them. Meanwhile in Canada, Smith takes Mulder past the body of the linesman and into a field where we see the children from the start working away. It's here that we get a major reveal and learn that all the girls here are clones of his sister Samantha. However, what's even more messed up is that these kids are actually drone clones who've been bred purely to tend the fields. They've got very little intelligence, can't speak or hit the thumbs up, and are just kind of blank slates. But obviously, Mulder's been searching for his sister for 4 seasons now, and he takes one of the kids because he refuses to let her go. Unfortunately, the bounty hunter arrives, but they lure him to a giant beehive, which is where he's stung by a swarm of them. Gotcha, sucker! Well, not really, and he continues to chase them, but I actually appreciated that they kept the bee stings on him for the rest of the episode. But he smashes the car and then knocks out Mulder right after saying, "Everything dies." Now, Smith flees during this, but he's in a pretty bad state, and we also don't really see what happens to the Samantha clone. But the bounty hunter does say he'll kill them. We then cut to Mulder back home getting comforted with Scully and going to see his mother. With Smith dead, he's accepted he can't save her, and things get worse when it comes to his allies. We watch as X goes to Mulder's apartment, but see it's actually a trap by the Syndicate. There he's shot and killed by the grey-haired man, but in his dying breaths he writes a message in his blood. That is SRSG, which stands for Special Representative to the Security General, which I got in one take. No, well, maybe not, but in my mind I did. But this is a clue to Mulder that he has to go and see Marita Kovarobias, who's played by someone I'm sure you instantly recognise. Laurie Holden is the person behind the character, and she basically becomes Mulder's contact going forward. She tells him the bee fields are completely abandoned, but makes it clear that she will help out the agent, and that she knows a couple of things she can't quite divulge yet.
Not everything dies, Mr. Mulder.
Now, killing X was something the creative team really wrestled with, and they actually wanted to do it at the end of season 3. However, they kept him in play because they kind of wrestled back and forth over whether to have him play a bigger part or fall victim due to helping out Mulder. As we see, the character pays the price, and this opens the door up for Marita. If you've seen our breakdown of the previous seasons, you'll know that originally X was going to be a woman, and they actually shot some scenes where that was the case, so I did wonder if this was them going down that route instead. We then end with the bounty hunter and Smoking Man standing over Tina at the hospital, where Smoking Man kind of plays his hand and shows he's a bit more of a complicated character as he asks the bounty hunter to heal her. However, he does it under the notion that the most dangerous enemy is one with nothing to lose, and that Mulder will be like a dog off the leash if she dies. The bounty hunter questions it, but the Smoking Man says that the work must continue unimpeded. Clearly though, the guy also has feelings for her and Mulder, and I wish you'd bloody admit it, mate. But yeah, great way to end the episode.
You know how important Agent Mulder is to the equation.
Now, episode 2 is probably the most infamous entry in the entire show's history. That is Home, which was banned from being aired on a lot of different networks. I think with modern eyes, it's not actually that bad, and you might watch it these days and think it's the kind of level that you'd get in a lot of horror TV shows. Maybe not Are You Afraid of the Dark, because that's a kid's show. Something like American Horror Story. I don't watch that anymore because it kind of jumped the shark a bit, but something along those lines. But yeah, at the time, it was very, very controversial. It was the first episode to air with a warning at the start and would have got a TVMA under the current ratings. However, it aired 2 months before that came into place and thus just skimmed by. The producers called it tasteless though, and whether it was them trying to quieten the dissent, it does kind of show that everyone attached to it was like, whoa, this is really bad as well. I agree with you, mate. I apologise. That sort of shit. Don't show it to kids, I guess. But this marks the return of writers Morgan and Wong, and we begin in the town of Home, Pennsylvania. Here we watch a woman giving birth to a deformed baby that 3 deformed men then bury in the garden. We then cut to a baseball game after the titles and get a lot of focus on a home-shaped home base.
But I'm not a rapper.
While playing, they accidentally disturb the child's grave, and we jump ahead to Mulder and Scully investigating. Now, they spot the Peacocks, who are the family in the episode's house in the distance, but the sheriff insinuates that they try and stay away from it. The house itself dates back to the Civil War and apparently hasn't been updated since. got no running water, no electricity or internet, and is probably quite a nice place if you live in Sunderland. But the sheriff says the family have been inbreeding since those old days, and to make matters worse, the Peacocks seemingly live in an all-male household, so it doesn't explain the baby. Only the brothers have ever been seen, and thus the agents suspect they have a woman captive there. Now, the inspiration for this came from the 1992 documentary Brothers Keeper. This centered around the Ward brothers, who were inbred siblings living in Munsville. One of the brothers, named William, died mysteriously, and thus the other one, Delbert, was put on trial for it. He was acquitted, but there were rumours of mercy killing, even though there was also suspicions of something sinister. Morgan named the Peacocks after neighbours of his parents, and according to the wiki, he was also inspired by Charlie Chaplin's autobiography. That detailed a strange night where he had dinner with an English family, and apparently they had a deformed son named Gilbert who used to live in a cupboard under the kitchen. So, just your regular night in Sunderland, eh? Woo woo! No, but I think the episode also owes a lot to films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and, of course, The Hills Have Eyes. That hillbilly horror is something that's been rampant over the decades, and this wears its influences on its sleeve. The agents then go looking for signs of the woman they suspect's being held captive, and though they find nothing beyond blood and scissors on a table, we cut to one of the family members listening to their conversation. So the Peacock brothers wait until the middle of the night and then head out to get revenge. Sneaking into the sheriff's home, we then get a very chilling scene where they kill him and his wife. Obviously, the agents want to go and arrest the family as well, and they head to the home with the sheriff's deputy. However, upon entering, Scully realizes it's a trap! Yeah, turns out they've home alone the house and got lots of stuff above doorways and windows that will kill you if you dare to enter. So the agents go to the pig pen, and we get a little reference to Babe as they try and move the animals.
No review! No review!
This then draws the brothers out to investigate, and they then manage to sneak into the house. It's at this point that we get another one of the series' signature Elvis jokes. Upon looking through stuff, they then find a quadruple amputee living under a bed who we quickly learn is actually Mrs. Peacock. Turns out she was thought to have died years prior in a car crash, but they've kept her alive, having children with the brothers. So yeah, she's living in an wait, what? She enjoys it! She enjoys it! Yeah, turns out she enjoys it too, and has a mother's love for her boys. It's at this point that the brothers then return to the house, and the agents use their guns along with the booby traps to take most of them out. But one survives, and after the carnage dies down, we see that the mother's missing as well. We end with the pair in their car at night heading out, and vowing to continue and find a home elsewhere. After all, home is where the heart is, and it closes out the episode with the pair in the wild. They then ride off to Wonderful Wonderful by Johnny Mathis, which they played before attacking the sheriff. And they'll go on to commit some more sick and twisted acts, hidden away like the mother was herself. So yeah, pretty messed up, but overall, I don't know if this is going to be controversial in itself. I didn't actually think it was that bad. Maybe it's because, you know, it was over-sensationalized and I had this massive thing built up in my head, or maybe I've just watched too many horrors involving incest, but I think this probably ranks lower down the list in terms of shock value when compared to, like, The Hills Have Eyes or something. I can understand it being shocking for the X-Files, though, especially on TV in the 90s, but these days, I don't think it's something that would be as lambasted, so yeah. Show it to kids, I guess. Episode 3 is also a standalone, I've got written in the script here, a standalone Henry, I think I meant entry, but that was one of the first episodes I ever saw. Titled Telico, we watch as a creature attacks a man in a plain bathroom with his body being found ghostly white. We then watch as this entity makes its way across Philadelphia and sees black men have their bodies drained of melanin. The creature doing this is called the Telico, which comes from West African folklore. The monster looks like a man and hides in the shadows, waiting to strike at night using the cover of darkness. What I think works so well about this episode, though, is that we follow things from the creature's perspective, and it does ground the Telico quite a bit. I see him kind of operating similar to Too Shy last season, and that he has deficiencies that make him attack others. They focus a lot on vitiligo, and there's points where the colour drains out of his body, leaving these patches that he has to replenish. Now, the reason that I remember this episode so well is because this is the first time I heard the term illegal alien. When I was a kid, I took the phrase literally and was like, well, that must be an alien, because they tell you that it is.
Somebody said alien. She thought they said illegal alien and signed up.
Fuck you, man.
The episode actually plays with that idea as well, and the Teleco disguises himself as an immigrant. Mulder and Scully track him down and chase him to an alleyway, which is where they find him hanging upside down in a really cramped space. This bit's burned into my brain as well, and there's a lot of complexities to this episode that I didn't pick up when I was younger, especially because I thought illegal alien meant alien. His immigration officer's played by Carl Lumley, and he does a fantastic job of explaining how otherness and fear of albinos even led to fears of the occult. Born from this was the legend of the Skinwalker, and albinos were often attacked because they were believed to be evil. Discusses how people face persecution because of the colour of their skin by people who face persecution because of the colour of their skin. And it adds a lot of really interesting aspects I think a lot of shows would probably avoid these days. Now, does it handle it perfectly? Nah, mate, it's a show from the 90s, and I do think people might see the episode as being problematic. However, I don't think they treat things like a joke, and they don't lean into stereotypes. The episode was quite scary for me as a kid as well, and I remember having nightmares about a man standing at the bottom of my bed because of what is said by one of the characters.
I was 7 years old. Lying awake one night, I saw him. He was standing over me. His hair was like straw, his eyes like water, staring down at me. I closed my eyes and screamed, and felt myself being swept up into the air. But when I opened my eyes, I saw my father holding me.
Then it was a nightmare.
That's what my father said. And I believed him. Until the next day, when they found my cousin dead among his cattle.
I'll talk about this more towards the end of the video, but this is something that reoccurs throughout the season, and yeah, the idea of you being asleep and something standing over you is something that happens quite often in the show. As a kid as well, I had no idea about any of the racial politics or immigration in general, so I can say firsthand that this still works as a scary episode, even if they don't really get right all of the things that they're talking about. And yeah, watching the Teleco hiding in a catering cart and then sticking his eyes out the bottom drawer is something that's going to creep you out whether or not you understand what's going on. I think the scientific side to it also helps make the monster plausible, and Scully explains things in a way that keeps the episode grounded. Though he's brought in, the Teleco escapes, and we see him terrifyingly holding Lumley's character at needlepoint before driving it into his brain through his nose, which is scary as shit. He does survive though, and they then find asbestos fibres in one of his victims, and this leads Mulder to a building site. Now, being the brave man he is, he obviously heads in there, but I was like, I don't know if you should be going in there, mate. And not because of the Teleco. It's fucking full of asbestos. You're gonna die! But Mulder is struck by one of the creature's paralytic darts, which leaves Scully alone to face down the baddie in the dark. He's also turned himself fully white, and yeah, I don't know if you'd get away with portraying an albino as a monster these days, but it's just quite a striking thing in the darkness. Eventually, Scully thinks it's a good idea to climb through a pitch black vent, which gives the scene something very akin to Alien. This is when the creature makes a move for her, but luckily Mulder warns her, even in his state, and she manages to turn around and shoot him. Teleco is then laid up in hospital, deteriorating quickly, with Scully doubting he'll ever make it to trial. Scully says in her report that she hopes science can discover what is going on with him and they might be able to find a cure. However, she also thinks that the fear of the alien among us often pushes humans to refuse to try and understand, and ultimately it causes us to deceive and basically become the worst versions of ourselves. Now, episode 4 is titled Unru, and it's written by Vince Gilligan.
You son of a bitch.
As with all this stuff, you know, it's going to be a really high level, and no, I don't think it's like the best of the best of the best, sir. It's still really good. Here we open with a woman going to get a passport photo, but she realizes she's forgotten her purse, and upon going back to the car, finds her boyfriend dead. She's then stabbed with a needle and kidnapped, and we see the photo now developed shows her screaming against a strange black background. Now the entry, or the Henry, centers around psychic photography. This is something that's been about since the invention of the camera, with people believing you could capture ghosts, images of things to come, and things that the naked eye couldn't see. In the episode, Mulder talks about Ted Sirius, who claimed through thoughtography that he was able to imprint thoughts psychically onto camera film. This was somewhat also the inspiration for The Ring, where we learn Sadako imprinted psychic visions onto a tape. But Mulder and Scully are brought in, and eventually the woman is found wandering the roadside. Though she seems healthy at first, it seems someone's performed a lobotomy. We then see this firsthand in the second victim, who awakens bound to a chair with a man standing over her. Brandishing an ice pick, he's also speaking German, which plays into the episode's title. That is the German word for unrest. Gilligan apparently came across a killer named Howard Unruh, who was a mass shooter in New Jersey who committed the Walk of Death. That happened in 1949, and from what I can gather, was America's first recorded mass murder in a single day. Gilligan found his surname meaning unrest as rather ironic, and ultimately spurred him on to do this. Helps the agents to unrest the perpetrator, which they discover by analysing the photos. There appears to be someone with really long legs, and when Scully comes across a man named Jerry wearing stilts, it all falls into place. Jerry tries to run, but he doesn't get that far wearing them, and eventually he's arrested. Played by Pruitt Taylor Vince, he nails the seemingly innocent man who also has a dark side. We learn that he's had a pretty messed up life, and this plays in the images in the photographs. Now, Jerry says that these are ghostly figures known as howlers, which are beings that are perceived through the frontal lobe. You might have noticed that there's been figures surrounding his victims in the photos, which Jerry says are these. Jerry says that people haunted by them also deny they exist, and thus their protests fall on deaf ears. When discovering the stills, they also saw the face of an old man and learned that Jerry had an abusive dad who Jerry was institutionalized for attacking. Jerry's dad also worked as a dentist, and Jerry's been tying up his victims in a dentist's chair. Jerry's second victim's found lobotomized as well, but Jerry sees himself as saving her from the howlers. When getting his mugshot, the police officer goes to check the picture, and he sees an image of himself being shot in the head. In his shock, he then drops his guard, and Jerry grabs his gun and then uses it against him. He then waits under Scully's car and drugs her with a needle, and she awakens to find herself about to be lobotomized. Yay! And Mulder is a bit shocked to see that the officer was shot in the neck rather than the head, which shows that the photos might not predict the future exactly. Throughout, there's been a dangling mystery about an image of Scully, in which he appears very similar to the woman at the start. Dana then talks in German to Jerry and tries to convince him that the howlers don't exist. But love, that's exactly what he said they'd say. So Jerry wants to prove that and takes a photo of himself. Meanwhile, as this has been going on, Mulder goes to his dad's old place of work and discovers the dentist's chair's missing. Slowly, he pieces together where she's being held at and rescues her and shoots Jerry dead. He then finds the photo that Jerry took before, which shows him dead on the ground. And it's quite a chilling way to end things. His diary is then discovered with a list of names that he was trying to save, including the previous victims and also Scully. So yeah, overall, pretty solid episode, but where we go next, I think, is one of the best they've done.
This is the field where I watched you die.
Episode 5 is The Field Where I Died, which I think is one of those episodes that I constantly hear brought up when I talk about the show. Based around past life regression, Mulder meets his soulmate in the form of a cult member named Melissa. A past life regression is something that I'm sure you've heard about time and time again, and there's been several documented cases that were achieved through hypnosis. There's even like a show in the UK on TV where celebrities would do it, and a lot of them all seem to be Cleopatra, which you can't all be, love. But yeah, we open with Mulder in a field holding 2 photographs of a couple from the Civil War lamenting a life lost. His narration talks about how he's desperate for another chance and how he's cried out for another go at things. You may notice the photo of the woman's torn as well, while the man is complete, and it foreshadows their fates. It's a gripping way to kick things off though, and you really wonder why the character looks so sad while looking at the figures. The episode brilliantly explores themes like destiny versus free will, and though with the premise it could be something hokey, I think it adds some really rich dynamics. As I'm sure you can guess, Mulder really takes the focus here, and it kind of helps to explain his loneliness. We begin with the ATF storming a cult which is known as the Temple of the Seven Stars. The episode is laced with a lot of imagery of Waco, with the ending especially basically clearly being based on it. Now, in case you don't know, it was basically a government-led siege to take down a cult. The cult itself was a split sector from the Seventh-day Adventists, which was led by David Koresh. In the cult, he took multiple wives, including kids, and stockpiled weapons and explosives. The ATF showed up with arrest warrants, but the group stood their ground, which then led to a gunfight. This evolved into a 51-day standoff and was massive news at the time. The FBI eventually launched tear gas to try and force him out, but not long after a fire started. Things then went crazy and fires just sprouted off around the location, and though it has been debated over what caused them, it's generally believed that it was actually Koresh's followers. This then led to the death of 76 people, including Koresh. Sadly, 25 of the dead were just kids, and alongside the dead federal agents, we had a total body count of 82. Criticism was levied against the government, and it's sort of been a massive factor in Timothy McVeigh's Oklahoma City bombing. Even to this day, it's still a massively controversial event that people still debate about. Be it things like religious freedoms or government overreach, it's the perfect thing to centre a show about the FBI around. Now, after receiving a tip-off about child abuse and weapons possession, the FBI and ATF stormed the temple's farmhouse. Unable to find the cult's leader Vernon, Mulder gets a sense of deja vu and rushes to a field where he finds a door on the ground. Upon opening it up, he finds Vernon and his wives about to sip the Kool-Aid. Now, Vernon actually comes from David Koresh's real name, which was Vernon Wayne Howell. He and the wives are then taken in, with them interrogating one named Melissa. Played by Kristen Cloak, she actually came over from space above and beyond. The showrunners had seen firsthand she was great at doing voices and thought that she'd be fantastic in a role like this. Cloak switches between them and mannerisms throughout the entry and, yeah, completely nails the role.
Look, leave the kid alone, hear me? She doesn't want to talk, right? No way, I'm sending her home.
Realizing the government's might and number, most believe they indeed would never again see the light of day.
They also question Vernon as well. We learn the tip-off came from a woman named Sydney, however, Vernon denies there being a member called that. As I'm sure you can guess though, Sydney is actually Melissa, and she slips into that persona at several points. Now initially, they do think it's DID, however, Fox also suspects she might be remembering things from a past life. Mulder clearly gets swept up by her and has a connection that the other agents don't. She then takes them to the field where you died.
He said it!
It's here that she then slips into her Civil War past life and talks about how Mulder was her husband who was killed in this very field, and she sadly watched him die. Well, don't feel too sad, because apparently he was one of the Confederates, mate. Bloody hell, Mulder. Is this why you were going after that guy so much last time? Melissa's then put under hypnosis, and she recounts the lives that the pair have lived together. Sadly, they always ended up in situations where one of them died, and thus they never got a happy ending. Mulder's curious as to whether that's really the case, and he's then put under hypnosis. It's a very vulnerable scene that paints the character in a new light and talks about how the agents and the ones around them have forever been connected. It's all connected. In this life, his son was Samantha and his dad was Scully, which makes later seasons a bit weird. Melissa was his husband though, and we learn the smoking man was also a Nazi officer. This is something that will come back around in one of the flashback episodes from what I remember, but I do remember the cigarette smoking man being a Nazi when they travel back in time at some point. Haven't watched through all the season before this video, I'm sorry. But yeah, Mulder says that the smoking man is someone who's always been there and that evil always comes back as evil. In this life, we learn they were also separated at a concentration camp, and Mulder also remembers the Civil War. He gives several names, which Scully later confirms, and it kind of ties into the reincarnation phenomena that you'll often see in young kids. And I'm not even lying, when my kids were born, I used to ask them stuff like, what job did you used to work as, to see if they remembered anything from the past life. They didn't, but still, you know, I'm a fucking idiot, and it was obviously a point of interest. The ATF and FBI then raid the temple again, and Vernon makes all the followers sip the Kool-Aid. Melissa doesn't go through with it though, and she awakens to find Vernon standing over her. Mulder then rushes to the temple to try and stop what's going on, and he finds the pair dead and his love lost once more. He then goes out into the field with the torn photographs of the woman from the Civil War and looks absolutely devastated that he never got that second chance. And whew, what a way to leave things. Overall, this is another incredible episode though, and at this point, I think everyone understood the assignment and basically knew how to do these almost operatic entries filled with tragedy.
You're claiming Sydney as her past life just because she mentioned Joe McCarthy.
It's not just that. Somehow I just knew.
Anyway, that takes us to episode 6, titled Sanguinarium. Nailed it in one. Based heavily around plastic surgery, it descends into a horror show, and we watch as doctors put their patients under the knife a little bit too much. It actually plays a lot into the occult, and we watch as the surgeons go into somewhat of a trance and kill their patients in very bloody fashion. Mulder finds a pentagram at the scene, and initially it seems like one of the nurses is a witch who's trying to stay young through her demonic rituals. There's baths of blood, and it nicely plays off the themes in the episode. At least initially. But halfway through, I was like, this is an episode about people who are desperate to stay looking young, and they'll do extreme things to achieve it, and we have a witch who's doing extreme things to achieve looking young forever. Kinda touches upon greed and trying to stay beautiful, which comes at the expense of others. The episode draws from lots of different things such as blood rituals and medieval medicine, the occult, and also cosmetic surgery scandals. We even have a scene at the midpoint where a patient's worried about being put under, but the staff is kind of like coaxing her into it, and ultimately she's lasered to death through the face in a scene that's pretty unforgettable. The 90s of course saw a boom in surgeries, and with this of course came the scandals. There were several botched surgeries, people underqualified, and lots of things gone wrong that of course still happen today. I even saw my research that there was apparently real occult subcultures in the medical settings, and the episode uses that all as its playground. Written by Vivian and Valerie Mayhew, the pair would later go to work on Charmed. This was their first episode, and they asked the staff writers how they approached things. The pair were told that the show tended to take the everyday mundane parts of life and turn it into something sinister. According to the wiki, Vivian was later paged by an unknown number and started to think about how scary this was. They then thought about the kinds of people who regularly use pagers, with them being doctors, and then went on to the idea of doctors being hijacked by something they didn't know. And that, kids, is how you write in X-Files. Now, Mulder being Mulder is like, actually, the pentagram is a protective symbol. As it turns out, the witch nurse we think is a baddie is actually trying to protect the patients. The nurse Rebecca is also named after Rebecca Nurse, who was executed during the Salem witch trials. She's incorrectly persecuted, and she attacks the hospital doctor Franklin in his home. She's arrested, but vomits up pins and ends up dying after doing this. Why she attacked him is because Franklin's the bad guy, and they discover one of the victims along the path of the occult killings looks exactly like Franklin. In the previous killing spree, 4 patients were murdered along with a doctor called Dr. Cox, who seemingly died of an overdose. The truth is, though, that Cox took Franklin's face and then started masquerading as the character.
His face?
During the climax, he then removes his face and steals another patient's before then fleeing from the agents. The episode closes out with him wearing this new face and heading to another hospital to work as a surgeon. And overall, it's another really strong entry that plays with your expectations throughout. Having just recently watched Weapons as well, I say recently, like last year, but having recently watched Weapons, I kind of felt like I knew where this was going. But it kept lots of twists and turns coming that I just didn't see, and ultimately was a really good ride. Episode 7 is Musings of a Cigarette Smoking Man, and as you can guess, it's the musings of a lone gunman about the cigarette smoking man. Now in it, we join the smoking man as he takes position above the lone gunman's hideout. Aiming a rifle, he listens into the group, telling the agents the history of the smoking man. Throughout the series, we've had him with the abbreviation CSM, and they even give a nod to this with how good the tech is to spy on them.
No electronic surveillance known can cut through the CSM-25.
To the characters in the show, he's simply known as the smoking man, but this is a nice little Easter egg for the audience to the character's official name. He also busts out a cigarette at the start of the scene, and we can see the pack has the phrase "trust no one." This is a nod to the season 1 episode, and also the title text change they used to replace "The Truth Is Out There." But what this episode is basically an entry in which we learn the biography of the smoking man. Throughout, we get several flashbacks of him assassinating JFK, Martin Luther King Jr., and basically altering history as a hidden hand that works in the shadows. We learn that his father was a communist spy who was executed by the government whilst his mother died of lung cancer. Stationed at Fort Bragg, he served as a captain alongside another familiar soldier.
My 1-year-old just said his first word.
What was the word?
JFK.
Catch you later, Mulder.
Taken to a meeting, we then learn he was involved in the Bay of Pigs and assassinated the 2 central figures there. They ask him for his stance on his dad, and he coldly states he wishes he could have flicked the switch himself. However, the army recognizes that though they didn't agree with his beliefs, they saw him as a man who was willing to execute them no matter what. They hope his sons inherited that determination and talk about how he's been picked to kill the man who almost destroyed the world. This part of the episode set in 1962, and we learn that it's in the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The target's painted out as a dangerous rogue, and he has to be killed to stop communism for good. Now that man, that dangerous rogue, is JFK, and he was trying to negotiate a peace with the Soviets. Just the way they paint it though, they sell it so well, and he accepts the job before meeting a man named Lee. Hey, wait a second! He gives him what he's told him are some curtain poles, which he's been instructed to go and dump in the book depository. Lee does this, and while he's off getting a drink, we then watch as the smoking man shoots the president from the sewers. The scene's laced with lots of conspiracies from the moment, including a man with an umbrella signalling to make the hit. Lee's then arrested in a cinema, and we see as the smoking man watches from the seats. The army base stuff actually opens with people asking him why he reads instead of just going to the cinema, and he basically says people who watch movies are morons. Hey, wait a second! So this is such a chilling reveal to see him sat there, and we then cut to 5 years later. Smoking man is writing a novel, and he hears Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech saying how communism rose because democracy wasn't made real. The smoking man even kinda looks a bit gutted, as he instantly knows that that's made him a target. Meeting with J. Edgar Hoover and a group of shadowy figures, they then talk about how they're gonna ruin the figure's life. This included the real-life blackmail letter that was sent to try and get King to take his own life. They also have them doctoring photos to make it seem like he's having an affair, but the smoking man muses that they're not going far enough. He thinks that King could convince his followers to reject the Vietnam War, and they say the quiet part out loud in that they'll lose the conflict if black people don't sign up to the army. So Smoking Man kills King on the motel balcony. The novel he's been writing is also rejected, and it's here that we jump forward to 1991. Guy's rocking a nicotine patch and is trying to fight his addiction. He's the one now running the show though, and he demands that the Buffalo Bills don't win the Super Bowl in his lifetime, which was pretty funny when you realise he's being serious. The guy controls history. Turns out that he also had the Miracle on Ice hockey match fixed, and he even had his hand in the Rodney King trial. However, he gets a message saying that Gorbachev's resigned, and he says that there's no more enemies. He then gives out Christmas presents to all the gang, which is a red and blue striped tie. I did even think this might be to represent the Democrats and Republicans coming together, because now they have a mix of the colours rather than one. Or maybe sometimes a tie is just a tie. However, things are done and the guy can leave the life behind. Or so we think. In what's an amazing appearance, we watch as he gets a call from Deep Throat and discovers there's been 2 aliens recovered from a crashed ship. Jumping back to season 1, you might remember Deep Throat told Mulder about the time he killed 2 innocent aliens, and this was what made him have a change of heart. I took this as being that moment, and it all comes down to a coin flip. The pair then decide who has to go and kill them, and Deep Throat loses, which makes him shoot them in cold blood. Smoking Man then pulls off the patch and goes back to hit that sweet cigarette. As for Deep Throat, we know that he'd then go on to leak stuff to Mulder, and it's an excellent moment with a great monologue as well.
How many historic events have only the two of us witnessed together? How often did we make or change history? And our names can never grace any pages of record. No monument will ever bear our image. And yet once again, tonight, the course of human history will be set by 2 unknown men standing in the shadows.
Tying in further with season 1, we then see the scene where Scully's assigned to go and spy on Mulder. He listens in on the pair's first meeting, with us getting audio from that scene. We then catch up to the present, where we see a magazine where his story's getting published.
What an active imagination you have. Alien assassinations.
Is it too much? Is my imagination too active?
Upon buying it from the stand, he then reads the ending's been changed and knows that he'll never be taken serious as a writer. Now, as I'm sure you remember, because let's face it mate, you're watching a fucking X-Files breakdown. I doubt you're 17 years old. So as I'm sure you remember, Forrest Gump was basically one of those big films in the 90s that utilised lots of pop culture references, narration, and also real nods to history with the characters inserted into it. This episode kind of feels like they're playing off that, and we even get a direct nod to it in the entry.
Life is like a box of chocolates. Cheap, thoughtless, perfunctory gift that nobody ever asks for. Unreturnable because all you get back is another box of chocolates. So you're stuck with this undefinable whipped mint crap that you mindlessly wolf down when there's nothing else left to eat. Sure, once in a while there's a peanut butter cup or a English toffee, but they're gone too fast and the taste is fleeting.
Just really humanises the villain though, and paints him in a new light that fleshes out the character. The entry even opens with a quote, "For nothing can seem foul to those that win," and it kind of speaks to how we justify things to ourselves. No one sees themselves as the bad guy, and we'll all tell ourselves things to explain why we did things. In order to pen this, writer Glenn Morgan also researched lots of declassified CIA documents and locked into the assassination thrillers like Day of the Jackal. They were also inspired by the graphic novel Lex Luthor, the Unauthorized Biography, which painted out the villain in a way that we'd never really seen him before. We then cut back to him spying on the gunman's office, and he decides not to shoot Frohickey, which leaves us ending with him quoting his own novel.
I can kill you whenever I please. Not today.
Now, they originally wanted to have him taking him out, but decided that it actually did more for the character to have him stay his hand. And I completely agree. Who had to be convinced though was actor William B. Davis, who apparently pushed back on Carter's decisions. He also didn't really get the whole book plot line and felt that someone like him would have no interest in writing novels. But Carter explained that someone who's a destroyer deep down wants to be a creator. Overall, it's a cracking episode that I think might actually be my favourite in the run so far. I just loved how it built off the conspiracy culture at the time though, and showed things from the side that we often don't get to see. Even, this series has been about Mulder trying to find the truth, and it's rare that we get answers, which runs all the way to the season finale. But here, it's all laid out in black and white, and it also heightens the show's big bad. According to the wiki, it also apparently has lots of nods to Space and Beyond, such as his novel Take a Chance being a play off something in that. But I've not seen it, mate. They also say the UN resolution to kill extraterrestrials is the 1013, which is Carter's birthday, and his production company is also called 1013 Productions.
I made this.
Off the top of my head as well, I think this might be the first episode that doesn't have Mulder in, but honestly, if they're rebooting the franchise, I wouldn't even mind it if we had a season just based around the smoking man. So yeah, 10 out of 10, another banger. Home run for the creators. Episode 8 then takes us to our first two-parter called Tunguska. Things wrap up in the episode Terma, and it's heavily centered around the black oil. Now, if you recognize the name Tunguska, then you'll know it's connected to the Tunguska event. In 1908, an event happened in which an entire forest in Tunguska was raised, with the energy there being 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb. The theories were this was caused by a meteor, though this has never been confirmed for definite. We learn in the entry this is connected to black oil and watch as the conspiracy spreads to be worldwide instead of just isolated to America. The creative team really wanted to show the effects of these conspiracies across the globe and how there was an arms race of syndicate-like forces who were trying to cure the black goo so they weren't helpless against their enemies. They read several books about life in the gulags and also NASA's report about the Allen Hills meteorite potentially containing alien life. We begin with a Congress meeting where Scully's quizzed on the location of Mulder, but she refuses to give him up. We then jump back in time to the Honolulu airport. There's a diplomat carrying a briefcase and he's taken out to get a cavity search. Guy refuses to unlock a canister containing the oil, and then the god does it for him. And yeah, you can guess how that goes down.
Well, here we go again, partner.
Think from the off, I was a bit like, why would they escort this highly dangerous substance this way? And then you see the government can't even redact files in real life. So yeah, they're pretty incompetent across the board. So yeah, that gets out Mulder and Scully, and they're pulled into it after they go to a raid and capture a man revealed to be Krychek. Mulder's about to punish him more than a Star Wars fan who's been waiting for a good film, but Krychek reveals he's the one who tipped him off. Tells him about the diplomat, and thus Mulder and Krychek head to the airport and nab a rock from him. At this point, Mulder's like, what the fuck, mate? It's just a rock. But Krychek is like, mate, this rock's more important than Dwayne Johnson.
The hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change.
Is this some kind of joke?
Obviously, though, he's not too happy, and Krychek's taken by Mulder to Skinner's apartment so the figure can lie low. And Skinner just smacks him on sight, mate. Like, proper loses it. But eventually, he handcuffs him to his balcony while the sciencey characters investigate the rock. This is tied to the asteroid, and it then unleashes the black goo on the scientist who examines it. Krychek then sees someone in Skinner's apartment, and he hangs over the edge, and then basically video game takes down them over it. But yeah, obviously, it draws some attention because it's like a dead guy on the pavement, but they manage to smuggle him out the building, and in
New York City,
Mulder meets with Marita. She then tells him about the rock originating from Tunguska. So it's off to Russia we go, but Mulder's like clearly annoyed with Krychek to the point he even leaves him to freeze in his car. It's only when he starts shouting in Russian that he goes back to get him because hey, he might be useful in the country. Now though, we don't learn too much about the agent, we discover through this that his parents were Cold War immigrants. It's not too long before they're then caught and taken to a gulag where prisoners are forced to dig rocks until they collapse, which is when they're experimented on. Mulder sees this firsthand and he awakens to find himself wrapped in wire, which is quite a harrowing moment. He's then infected with the black goo as he's restrained, and we close out the episode going into Terma. Terma refers to the Buddhist teachings that were hidden from the world, which are supposed to represent the Syndicate's secret society. The tagline in the credits is also altered to "E per si muove," which is Italian for "yet it moves." This was said by Galilei when the Roman Inquisition wanted him to denounce his beliefs that the sun wasn't the center of the universe. It's all about questioning things and basically standing up to the authorities to stand by your beliefs. The episode is basically all about Mulder escaping and learning a bit more about the black goo. Now, we didn't really touch upon it much in the previous episode, but while in prison, Krycek made himself more and more valuable to Mulder. Obviously, being in a Russian prison when you don't speak Russian isn't really good, mate. Krycek even bragged that he guessed Mulder would need him now, but an ally came in the form of someone in the cell next to him. He actually warned him that Krycek wasn't who he said he was, and in this episode, we learn he's a double agent. Mulder's given a knife by him which he uses to attack Krycek outside when he sees him chatting with a guard, and then he sneaks into a truck before being chased. He takes Krycek in the back, but he wakes up and then drives off on the road. Eventually, the truck is run off the road itself, and though Mulder hides, Krycek is found. This is by a group of people with amputated arms, and they cut his off to stop the stuff with the vaccination.
No arm, no test.
In America, we then see an ex-KGB agent named Pescow assassinates a doctor who's been developing a vaccine for the Syndicate. He also kills the doctor's test subjects and basically helps to heighten this Cold War conspiracy. The Russians aren't all bad though, and a group find Mulder, nurse him back to health, explain the vaccinations, and then send him back to the US. This takes us back to the Senate committee, which Mulder arrives at, and thus they don't really need to continue. What they do need to do though is stop Pescow, and they follow him to Florida, where he's able to destroy the last of the meteorite rocks. He then returns to Mother Russia, which is where we see the person who hired him was Krycek. Dun dun dun! Now, I think I might be in the minority here, but I didn't really get caught up in either of these episodes. I think just in general, bar The Great Escape in Shawshank, I'm not actually that hot on prison stories. I also think the armed stuff with Russia kind of made stuff a bit, I don't know, a bit cliche, because I've seen so many Cold War stories at this point. Even Stranger Things is like built all around that. Considering I've consumed so much of this as well with all the spy stuff over the years, I don't know. I think it just felt a bit more of the same. The X-Files to me is something that brings in things in a brand new way and toys with stuff that rarely gets live screen adaptations. Also, I think taking the focus off aliens and instead making a Cold War thing, I don't know, made this feel a bit lower than the others. Sound like I'm completely shitting on it, but it is good. It's just not great, and it dips a bit in quality compared to the others. For me anyway, and I know I'm in the minority. Thankfully, the following episode, Paper Heart, is absolutely incredible and probably one of my favourites in the whole run. We begin with Mulder being led to a forest by a red light that lands on a corpse of a young girl. This then turns into a heart, and he awakens to lead people to the site the next day. Here he finds a body, and upon exhuming it, she's connected to the serial killer John Lee Roach. He used to work as a vacuum cleaner salesman, which allowed him to see people's homes and families. Roach would then enter the house and kidnap young girls and cut out a heart-shaped piece of their clothing. And we learn that Mulder was the man who captured him and basically brought an end to the crime spree. Roach's fabric cuttings were never found though, and these pop up throughout the episode to confirm he had other victims. Though the killer is thought to have operated just in the 80s, this newly found girl went missing in 1975. Thus they start to re-examine cold cases and go to Roach to try and get him to confess to more crimes. We then have a really harrowing moment where the agents go to the victim's dad, who talks about how he always wanted closure on his daughter's death. However, now he's got it, he wonders if it was better not knowing, as that was a way to at least live in hope. Now Vince Gilligan was the man who penned the episode, and he looked at killers who kept mementos of their victims. Some of these involved cutting off fabric, and killers like Gary Ridgway would take jewelry and items of clothing to remember those he killed. Gilligan wrote the part of Roach with Tom and Noonan in mind, and he's such a chilling bad guy to have in the episode. Mulder and Scully visit him in prison, and he just smugly parades about smirking and has I don't know, an air of arrogance that he's still alive while his victims aren't. Mulder even asks him if he'll admit to other victims to give their families closure, and he just toys with the agent even though he bests him.
How about this? Take one from there and I'll tell you.
Trust a child molester?
This was apparently pulled off by Duchovny on the first take with him using no wires or assistance. Duchovny actually played basketball for Princeton University and got this through with nothing but net. Now what this episode really shows is how evil people can manipulate you and really get into your mind. That night Mulder has a dream about his sister, which makes it seem like it was Roach who abducted her. This is where the episode really takes off, with Mulder trying to tie Roach to the case. Obviously he desperately wants closure, but Roach weaponizes this to manipulate the agent. Now this apparently all just sprung from a question where Gilligan simply asked, "Hey, what if aliens didn't abduct Samantha?" The 80s and 90s, of course, also had a spate of child killings, and it seemed like almost every single summer you'd have a high-profile case. Hell, even in the UK, I remember regularly seeing things like Millie Dowler, Holly in Jessica, Sarah Payne, and yet, luckily, we don't get many cases like that these days. Technology and surveillance have made it much easier to track and find people, but yeah, in the 80s and 90s, happened quite a lot. And that might also be the only time I'm pro-surveillance in these X-Files breakdowns. But Mulder starts to question Roach more and more, and Roach continues to play games. He even asks him to guess which fabric heart was Samantha, which shows just how much that he relishes having the agent on the hook. There's also a scene where Mulder hits him during interrogation and a guard rushes in to stop them, and Roach complains and he's all like,
"I didn't see it."
Which is also like the only time in these breakdowns I'll applaud police brutality. But Roach claims that he sold Mulder's dad a vacuum cleaner, and Mulder indeed finds an old one in his basement. So he does what any sensible person would do, which is break Roach out of prison and take him back to his family's old summer home. In chilling detail, he then goes through all the details of how he observed the family, waited until the parents were gone, and then came in and took Samantha from the home. He clearly loves pushing Mulder's buttons and getting joy from revealing what happened. But the truth is, he's lying, and Mulder reveals his dad bought the house after his sister was abducted. So hey, this guy's a big fat phony. But yeah, it's all done, and then Mulder goes to take him back to prison. Whew. Only issue is though, is that he falls asleep, has a dream about Samantha, and then wakes up to find the bad guy gone. To make things worse, he also stole his gun, his badge, and also his phone. Not the best thing you could have done, Mulder, in hindsight that. Hot on his heels, we learn Roach has used this all to kidnap a girl, and they catch him in what's known as a bus graveyard. Buses, especially in America, are of course associated with kids because of school, and it's quite a horrifying place to have things go down at. Roach has a gun on the girl toying with Mulder, and he says that if he shoots him, then he'll never get closure on Samantha. But Mulder sees him going to squeeze the trigger and shoots him in the seat. Whew. So I'm glad that's all wrapped up, but obviously you're fired, mate. Nah, it's Mulder, he's the main character, so he will be back, and we end with him looking at the final fabric heart, wondering whether or not it really belonged to his sister. And overall, I'm saying this a lot this season, but an incredible episode that's aided by some outstanding performances. Even the basketball shot shows everyone's hitting at an all-time high, and personally, I think this is Duchovny's best so far. Noonan is brilliant as well, and just so good at oozing a creepiness. He of course starred in Manhunter, Last Action Hero, and RoboCop 2, but I think this might even be his most villainous performance. That then takes us to episode 11, which is titled El Mundo Gira. Unfortunately, it's one of the weaker entries in the show, but it does have a great performance by someone you might recognize. That is Raymond Cruz, who was unforgettable in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. He would of course work with Gilligan down the line, and yeah, just nice seeing him in this episode. We also have Ruben Blades as well as the cop, who had his own run-in with an Alien and Predator 2. The episode is another one of those, though, where people suspect it's the Chupacabra, which I think this might be the third one they've done that in, and they still haven't given us the Chupacabra for real yet. But in doing my research, I found there was actually a panic in Puerto Rico in 1995 where livestock and humans were found drained of blood. There were puncture wounds found in the corpses, and thus people believed it was the Chupacabra. But that's stupid, mate. What a bunch of idiots. Yeah, everyone knows it was aliens. There was actually a clash of conspiracies at the time, with eyewitnesses claiming there were reptilian people who did it, aliens, and of course demons. However, where it clashes a bit more with reality is that there was migrant worker exploitation that often exposed workers to pesticides and dangerous chemicals. In the entry, we join a Californian migrant camp where two brothers are basically in love with the same woman. She runs off to feed some livestock, and then there's a lightning strike that leaves a horrifying aftermath. She's found dead with her mouth decayed away, her skin burnt, and an animal beside her with the same thing. Cruz's Eladio is suspected of being the Chupacabra, which is pushed further by his jealous brother. He's ostracized from his community and almost deported, and yet, having just lost the love of his life as well, The guy's not having a good time. What it really is, though, is an extreme version of Athlete's Foot, which rapidly kills its host. Writer John Shaban had heard of a highly dangerous fungal infection, and he combined this with the myth of the chupacabra. Beyond that, he used to drive past long lines of migrant workers in LA and thought about what could happen if the infection broke out amongst the community. Most of it's about Eladio being pushed out, trying to gain work, go back to normal, and basically dealing with a community that thinks that he's cursed. The love story, unfortunately though, is very, very telenova, and the episode's title itself even translates to As the World Turns, which was a popular soap opera at the time back in my day. Eventually, Eladio returns to Mexico seeking help from his pal Gabriel, and in real life, she and Cruz were dating and later got married, which is nice, I suppose. Over the course of the episode, we then see Eladio's basically a carrier who kills all those that he touches. He also begins to mutate, looking more and more alien-like, which he says is him becoming the chupacabra. In the end, he returns home, and his brother becomes a carrier too after a dramatic showdown with the pair fleeing back to Mexico. Again, not the best episode, but you might enjoy it, mate. Don't think like it's badly acted or anything, but just the killer fungus concept is a bit difficult to turn into an amazing story, I think. Unless it's like they become zombies in The Last of Us or something. Episode 12, though, is one of the most popular ones that the series has ever put out, and that is Leonard Betts, which, as we mentioned before, reveals Scully's cancer. In it, we join paramedic Leonard Betts, who seems to have a knack for diagnosing patients' illnesses sight unseen, especially cancer. Betts is killed in the opening, and yet somehow someone like him pops up several days later doing a similar job. It's revealed that he's like a living cancer, and the free radical cells are geared towards rebuilding his body. The regeneration aspect draws from real-life cases seen in salamanders and starfish where they're capable of regrowing limbs. Betts is also similar to a faith healer, and that he can sense what's going on with a person's body. Throughout the episode, we discover that Betts survives by feasting on the tumors inside others, and he's willing to kill to cover this up. This even extends to taking out his old partner and faking his death a number of times. He basically regrows an entire version of himself and then uses them to go and die in a massive blaze of glory. They also have a scene, right, which I don't know if it's meant to be funny or what, but they have a scene where he rides out in a car and Scully shoots it a couple of times and then the whole thing just blows up. As they pull into this location, we also see a familiar looking camper van, and since Vince Gilligan wrote this episode, I did wonder if he later referenced this with the camper van in Breaking Bad, cause they do look similar-ish. The episode is basically a deadly game of cat and mouse though that's laced with a hell of a lot of body horror. There's a great moment where he basically vomits up himself, and overall there's some really memorable moments. Betts is also played by Paul Crane, who's an actor you might recognise from RoboCop, and ER apparently, which I've also never seen. 40-hour breakdown on every season of ER coming soon. Also, shout out to Mecha AO on Twitter for pointing out that he's like his character from RoboCop 2, where he emerges out the toxic waste, and I did wonder if they cast him for that reason. Now, I'm kind of burying the lead here, and why the episode's so talked about is that this is the one that Scully is diagnosed with cancer. In the final showdown, she finds herself locked in an ambulance with him, who tells her that she's something that he needs. Though she takes him out by using a defibrillator, we end with her clearly shocked by what's just happened. It takes something from just being a monster of the week story to something with massive ramifications, and though I don't think it's an amazing episode, there will be fallout from this. As for episode 13, that's titled Never Again, which centers around an evil tattoo.
Never say never.
In it, Mulder's told he has to take some holiday, otherwise he'll have to pay back the agency for holidays owed. Which sounds wrong, but he's pretty much out of the picture. However, we do get a call from him at the midpoint where we see he's visiting Graceland. And that's your big Elvis Easter egg for the season. But if you cast your mind back to a couple of seasons ago, then you might remember we had an episode during Scully's disappearance where Mulder went off and hooked up with a vampire. Or she was nearly a vampire or something. Look, it gets confusing. But here, Scully has a similar sort of thing with her meeting a man whose tattoo compels him to do evil. The tattoo itself is actually voiced by Jodie Foster, and her Clarice was of course a big inspiration on Dana. Throughout it tells its owner Ed to commit violent acts, and he fights the urges which include meeting Dana. Knowing that time may be running out, Dana also starts acting rebellious, and she's questioning why she's pretty much always played second fiddle.
Not everything is about you, Mulder.
On assignment, she then runs into Ed, and the pair hit it off right away. Dana even embraces her wild side and gets a tattoo around the 29-minute mark. Throughout their dates though, Ed's tattoo constantly tells him to attack her and also hit subscribe, but he resists it until eventually it gets too much and Scully has to go toe-to-toe with him. Obviously, she comes out on top, but it really explores how she is without Mulder. Ed also becomes fixated on people because of the tat, and I did even wonder if this is why they chose Foster. Foster was famously stalked by John Hinckley Jr., who was obsessed with the actress. There's also ergot poisoning, which is similar to the Salem witch trials, and a comment on how tattoos became a sign of rebellion. Now, the story itself isn't really anything special, but where it excels is showing Scully standing on her own 2 feet. So far, she'd pretty much always been the second character in the show, but this shows a side to her that we haven't really seen before. She's clearly grappling with her mortality, and it's nice seeing the character get to go and live a little. Episode 14 is Memento Mori, and it has Scully sort of encountering the women from the cancer group once more. Dealing with her impending death, Scully confronts her mortality throughout the episode. There's lots of introspective scenes where she writes notes for Mulder and begins to accept that she doesn't have long left to live. She also finally tells her mother, who initially is furious that she kept this secret from her. The writers drew from real-life cancer support groups and merged these with abduction survivor ones, which inspired the MUFON one that we get in the show. They also touch upon experimental treatments, which is kind of where we head towards at the end. Now, Mulder refuses to accept things, and with the help of the lone gunman, they start looking into the abduction being behind her illness. Scully learns that almost all the group members she met previously have died from cancer, with Penny Northern being the only one still hanging on. Scully sits at her bedside throughout and begins to accept that this is the fate that awaits her. Meanwhile, we see as the grey-haired man kills someone known as Kurt Crawford, with the agents tracing him through a call on one of the previous group members' phones. Now, while this is going on, Mulder meets with Skinner, who's also become aware of Scully's cancer. Mulder says that the smoking man likely has a way to save her and ponders whether he should go to the villain or not. However, Skinner says it's a bad idea and that he'll then owe the smoking man a favour. He says that being indebted to him could mean that he has to cross a line and go against his principles to pay what he owes. And yet, when it's saving Scully's life, you can bet the cost is gonna be high, which we will discuss later down the line. But Mulder agrees with him and says there has to be another way, which is when he doubles his efforts. This is when he and the gunman track down a lab, which is where he finds several clones of Kurt Crawford. The clone thing's obviously been done several times before, but we learn these are built off the people that we saw in the tanks in season 1. They reveal that the women in the cancer group were actually used as their mothers, and that they've been desperately trying to save them. They give Mulder Scully's harvested ovaries, and it's at this point that the grey-haired man goes hunting for him. He has a near run-in, but manages to escape, and returns to the hospital to learn that Penny's died. But Scully is resolute that she'll fight, and we end on quite an ominous note. Mulder calls Skinner to thank him for his advice and for not trying to make a Faustian deal with the smoking man. This is when we pull out to see the smoking man with Skinner, and Skinner is the one who's actually decided to make one. The pair are meeting to negotiate the terms, and we end focus on Skinner as he basically sacrifices himself in a way to help out Scully. Now, though sacrifice probably isn't the right word to use there, because he's not going to die, but he's kind of made a deal with the devil so that Mulder doesn't have to. It really shows how he values his allies, and it's such a great and heroic moment for the character that will be discussed down the line. Now, from what I can gather, this episode was a bit of a rush job, and they actually had a scene involving Scully's brother. He was cast as Pat Skipper, but they had to cut it due to time constraints. However, he does play the character down the line in the finale of this season, where they kind of clearly have a scene that they would have had here, but we'll talk about it later. From here, we then go to the episode Kaddish, which centers around an anti-Semitic murder mystery. The golems created to avenge the fallen, and the episode's a bit all over the place, but I will say it has an absolutely fantastic score. Now, Kaddish is a Jewish state of mourning that typically lasts between 30 days and 11 months. The plot is basically one of those ones that we've had before, where a ghost comes back to get revenge and then works through a list of characters connected to their death. Something that, they've done time and time again, and something they'll also do again down the line, which will actually happen very shortly in the very next episode. Where this one differentiates itself, though, is it deals with a lot of Hasidic Jews, so there's a number of things culturally that they touch upon. Though the show, had tackled Christianity several times, it had rarely dipped its tone to other faiths, unless they were like ancient shaman stuff. But yeah, upon the episode's release, the Holocaust was within recent memory and was only like the distance between now and the release of Star Wars, I think. I'm trying to do it in a relatable way, but because of this, the Jewish characters distrust the government quite a lot and see the agents as people who are turning a blind eye to the attacks. On the flip side of this, we have an anti-Jewish organization set up by a shop owner who was in competition with the Jewish businesses. He thinks that Jews run the government and that Mulder looks Jewish and therefore is persecuting him for asking questions. So both sides basically hate the agents. In the episode, we learn the guy who murdered them's come back from the dead, and it plays off the folklore pretty well. Now, throughout this episode, we meet a woman called Ariel, who was due to be wed to the murder victim Isaac. Her dad actually survived the concentration camps, but watched as his entire family were murdered. He stowed away a wedding ring throughout the whole ordeal, but upon the pair seeming happy, presented it to them, saying that the family was reborn again. Now, this was actually based on a real-life wedding that writer Howard Gordon attended. The rabbi was a survivor of the Holocaust and brought forth the ring as a ceremonial item to celebrate love. Unfortunately, in the show, it was taken away in another act of hate, and Ariel's created the golem out of the grief and pain of losing her love. The agents confront the pair at a synagogue exchanging wedding vows, but after it attacks, she accepts that he's gone and basically returns it to the dust. To dust. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, that sort of thing. It's symbolic. The golem in general, though, is quite an interesting creature, and it's far beyond the usual monster of the week thing. According to the wiki, every Jewish writer who'd passed through the team had suggested this at one point, but they couldn't quite find an emotional heart to this concept. From what I can gather as well, this legend gained popularity due to the Golem of Prague, which was created by Rabbi Judah Loew in the 16th century. This was basically made to protect Jewish people, so this episode has basically pulled a lot from folklore and kind of updated it based off modern problems. So yeah, I think it's worth watching, even though it's not really the ones I think that I'll instantly think of when I think back to this season. Episode 16 is also another kind of one of those episodes called Unrequited, which follows a Vietnam vet who can seemingly turn invisible. He goes around hunting down people that wronged him, and yeah, you know what's going on here. Now, due to Skinner's involvement in the war, he aids the investigation quite a lot and points out the cards found at the crime scenes that were used by soldiers to mark their kills. They also go to a number of people connected to the deaths and learn of Sergeant Nathaniel Teager. Teager was left for dead as a prisoner of war, and he blames the military for leaving the captives to suffer. Now, as a fan of Rambo 2, I saw a lot of similarities to the abandoned prisoners of war plot that existed in that film. 60 Minutes also did a documentary on the forgotten Vietnam prisoners of war, and it's quite an interesting premise for an episode, especially as some just brush it off as being a conspiracy theory. But this is perfect for an X-File, and though their being prisoners has been staunchly denied, it's nice that this episode questioned things. Teager actually visits a war widow at one point to tell her that her husband's still alive and in one of the camps, and he's one of the bad guys that you start to understand. Mulder also starts to theorize about how Teager's disappearing. He brings up how during the war, Viet Cong was said to have disappeared and reappeared out of thin air. Ambushes were common, and the soldiers would often lose them during a chase. As we know though, they had networks of tunnels under the ground and would wear civilian clothes, but Mulder thinks it's something more supernatural. He deduces that Teager can only be seen out of the corner of your eye, and that if you get him in a direct line of sight, then you're not going to see him. So he's basically John Cena, and it makes for quite a good villain to have, where you kind of have to use your peripheral vision. Teager's hunting down the heads involved in the prisoner negotiations, and he goes on a run trying to kill them. This includes the climax, which is a rededication ceremony. The agents finally manage to shoot him, and he dies from his wounds while saying his military ID. Things quickly get covered up though, and the official story is that the assassin's someone else. Mulder's furious that they've buried the truth, and it clearly doesn't sit well with Skinner. We end with him looking up Teager's name on the war memorial, clearly questioning whether they're still brothers in arms. And it's such a somber way to end things. Now overall, I think the episode's okay, but probably not one of those ones I'd go back to. And yeah, at this point, we'd had a lot of military members with supernatural powers hunting down the officers who'd wronged them. Don't know if I'd enjoy it more without seeing all the ones that came before it, but for me, it's kind of the middle of the pack. Episode 17 kind of follows that notion as well, as we have another two-parter based around the UFO mythology. Named Tempest Fugit, this of course translates to Time Flies, and it's a bit of a pun as well, which I'll explain in just a bit. We begin by watching a plane crash, and upon walking the site later, the agents notice some of the watches have 9 minutes missing. This of course calls back to season 1, where Mulder would use stopwatches to show lapses in time. Throughout, victims kept getting their watches stolen, with the government using this to hide the truth. The first season also introduced us to UFO enthusiast Max Fennick. He kind of became a precursor for the lone gunman and was a UFO abductee who disappeared in a flash of light. Max looks rather scared and paranoid in the plane, with the focus of the scene primarily being on the passenger beside him. He goes to the toilet, and when he comes back out, there's a bright light with Max missing from his seat. The emergency door is open as well, and the agents are brought in to investigate things further. Now, the team behind the show had to create a highly accurate 737 to simulate the crash, and also wanted to make a personal connection to Mulder. So they thought it was the perfect time to bring back Max, though he doesn't play a big part in the episodes per se. But during the episode, we learn from Max's apparent sister Sharon that Max was planning on bringing something to Mulder, and Mulder theorizes that Max was abducted by aliens. The passenger beside Fennec is also found still alive with radiation burns, and it's believed that Max may have snuck something on board. They discover that he worked at an atomic weapons facility and may have carried plutonium on board the plane, which is why it went down. Cheers for that, Scully. We also have a man in black who's cleaning things up and melting faces and fingerprints to cover up people close to the case. Sharon is also kidnapped as well, and it's clear some higher up power is locking things down. The agents then decide to go to the US Air Force Air Traffic Control, which is where they meet Sergeant Louis Frisch. Frisch was on shift during the crash, but he keeps things stum and says that everything seemed normal. However, his colleague has a stern word with him after it about lying, and Frisch later finds him dead at his computer. It's been staged to make it seem like he took his own life, but this causes Frisch to turn snitch. He tells them that he was ordered to send the coordinates and that the plane was then intercepted by government aircraft. Mulder figures out there was actually a third craft there as well, and that the government was sent in to neutralize this UFO. They wanted whatever Fennec had that was emitting the radiation, but the humans obviously didn't want this to fall into their hands. In doing so, they caused a commercial plane to crash in the crossfire, and the agents want to take Frisch into protection. This causes lots of commandos to descend on them, and there's a great action scene in the runway with them narrowly missing a plane. They manage to get away though, and the agents decide to split up, with Scully taking the sergeant. Frisch is all like, mate, can I ring my girlfriend about where I am? And Scully is like, oh yeah, of course you can, mate. Yeah, go ahead and do it. Great idea. Use my phone. They then go to a bar where they run into Pendrell, who's always had a crush on Scully. Now, I have kind of skipped over him a lot in the breakdowns, and though I've mentioned him from time to time, he's never really been crucial to the plot. And these videos are long enough. I'm looking for stuff to cut as it is. Pendrell has been there quite a lot and clearly, has a massive crush on Scully. He also seems a bit jealous of the sergeant, but he's unaware that he's not there for a date. But he basically wants to try and ruin the date, so he offers to buy them drinks to join them at the table. Unfortunately though, this leads to something big. As Pendrell's carrying the drinks over, the man in black enters to kill Frisch, and he ends up trying to shoot him. Unfortunately, this is as Pendrell's getting to the table, and thus he gets a couple of shots at the bar, and not in a good way, mate. Hey. He then ends up being declared dead in the next entry, with Scully saying she didn't even know his first name. Whew, the ultimate simp. And you said the worst thing she could say is no. But Scully manages to hit the hitman. However, that mustache will return in Avengers Doomsday. Anyway, while this has been going on, Mulder heads to one of the crash sites at Lake Skadanga. He learns that government agents have been searching the area and decides to go looking for the wreckage. Scuba diving, Mulder finds the body of an alien, and we end with someone on the surface coming across him. Overall, this nicely sets the stage for episode 18, and that is titled Max. This picks up with Mulder being captured by the commandos. With Scully, Skinner says that everything's been pinned on Frisch, including the death of his colleague. So he's being arrested for not only that, but apparently for also giving a false testimony. Mulder's then released, with the official explanation being that Frisch caused the crash and then tried to cover it up. But mate, Mulder's literally just found an alien underwater. However, Scully seems to believe it, and when Sharon's revealed to be a woman who met Max in a mental institution, it seems like no one's gonna believe Frisch. Mulder then ends up going to Max's home, where he watches a tape, and it's quite a touching moment. Mulder sees a lot of similarities between him and Max, and it's a tragedy knowing Max died just simply trying to show people the truth. And yet, the guy was abducted and then ostracized as no one believed him, and Mulder was the only one who had faith in him. So it hits quite close to home. He then ends up returning later on and finds a luggage claim ticket while Scully goes to see Sharon. Shazza tells Scully she has parts of the device that Max stole, and Mulder gets another piece at the airport. He takes a flight, and this leads to an amazing scene on the airplane where the mustache man in black sits down next to him. Initially he's like, mate, is it alright if I sit here? And yeah, flights pre 9/11 were wildly different. Could just go and sit where you wanted. And smoke as well. Brilliant. Mulder is being polite at first though, and then notices the wound on his leg. He immediately tells him he can get to his gun before Tom Cruise at the start of Mission Impossible 1 can, but the man in black isn't so sure. They have a really good back and forth where they talk about what could happen if things go to a gunfight and all the stuff about air pressure, which, yeah, we've all seen Goldfinger, mate. Seen it like 400 times. Mulder also asks whether all the people on the plane are worth killing for the device, and he ponders what the device is actually for. He even thinks it might be cold fusion, and the man in black is clearly willing to die for it. Now this scene is apparently inspired by The Third Man, which is an absolute classic that I highly recommend. Mulder then leads him to the toilet and stuffs a cart in front of it, but it doesn't do much because the guy just pops out with a gun and we can see the trolley's just been pushed out the way. Not a good idea, mate. Mulder hands things over, which is when a bright light appears and the door gets pulled off. The plane then lands with Mulder's watch missing 9 minutes and the device and the man have completely disappeared. The agents are no more wiser than they were, but Sharon's learned quite a lot and grown as a person, and Mulder wants her to memorialise Max. Outside, Scully also mourns Pendrell, and we end with quite a poignant speech.
I think that you appreciate that there are extraordinary men and women, and extraordinary moments when history leaps forward on the backs of these individuals. That what can be imagined can be achieved. That you must dare to dream, but that there's no substitute for perseverance and hard work and teamwork, because no one gets there alone. And that while we commemorate the greatness of these events and the individuals who achieve them, we cannot forget the sacrifice of those who make these achievements and leaps possible.
Episode 19 is Synchrony, and it's a lot of timey-wimey wibbly-wobbly stuff that I actually think might have inspired Looper. In the future of 1997, an old man stumbles across of MIT students who are currently arguing. The old man tells the Nazi agent from Deadpool that he's gonna die very, very soon, and he says that he's come here to stop it. The man is then escorted away by campus security, but just as he predicted, Deadpool agent dies after being hit by a bus.
You're welcome, Canada.
His pal Jason Nichols has the death pin on him, with the driver saying that he pushed him in the road. Which, yeah, the guy doesn't get paid enough to take the fall for this shit. Under interrogation, Jason then says he was actually trying to save his mate, but unfortunately, he has a motive for his murder. His pal was about to expose that they'd falsify data in order to attain funding, and this would have basically ruined Jason for life. Now, while this is going on, the old man meets with a Japanese researcher named Dr. Yanechi, who's played by Hiro Kanagawa. Sorry, I fucked that up. I'm gonna fuck up every single name that isn't basically Paul, John, or Joe. But he's a pretty well-known actor and has a list of credits running from Smallville to Shogun. The guy isn't in the episode long though, as the old man tells him in his hotel room that he was one of the key people in his research. He says that eventually he'll help to crack cryopreservation, which will mean that people can be frozen indefinitely. This becomes somewhat ironic as well, as the man pricks him with a needle and we watch as Yoni starts to freeze to death. Yoni is also the nickname he gives him, showing that he indeed knows the character quite well. Jason's fingerprints are then later found in his body along with the campus security guard who's also been frozen. Now, in case you haven't figured it out, the old man and Jason are one and the same, with the former coming back to stop the other's work.
I think the old man in this story is going to be Jason Nichols, serving 25 to life in a federal prison.
Which, yeah, Scully calls in the first 10 minutes. Well done, you done it for once. Now, obviously she doesn't know, but I just love the writing that you pick up on a second watch. Initially, he wanted his pal to go public, and failing this is now taking out those connected to the project so they don't make their breakthrough. They actually come close to bringing Yoni back to life as well and manage to unthaw him before then reviving him. However, Yoni then starts to internally combust and he basically sets on fire on the table. Now, the person who attempts to bring him back is Lisa Linnelli, who the agents learn is Jason's girlfriend and colleague. She talks about how there was a chemical inside Yoni's body that allowed the doctor to be cryogenically frozen. However, as far as she knows, it hasn't been invented yet. Upon returning home, she's stalked by the older Jason, who goes to kill her but can't bring himself to do it. It's in this that we learn it was actually Lisa who faked the data and that Jason covered for her because he loved her. Lisa describes the old man to the agent but recognizes something about him in his e-fit. But the search takes them to a hotel where they find an old photo of Jason, Lisa and also the doctor celebrating something in a cryogenic lab. As you've probably figured it out as well, this photo is from the future to commemorate the trio making their breakthrough. While this is going on, Lisa then finds the old man, and this is when he tells her the truth. He says that Lisa eventually discovers how tachyons work, and in case you don't know, these are particles that can basically move backwards through time. This is only by a couple of seconds, but the theory is that they can expand this movement to humans. Now, tachyons do this at 0 Kelvin, aka absolute zero. This is an absolute minimum temperature where all thermal motion and kinetic energy completely ceases. Now, physics say that time travel, though potentially possible, is something the human body couldn't actually endure. According to the physicists, even if we do it, the temperature and entropy reversal would kill us, and it's something they kind of tackle in Tenet. However, combined with cryogenics, it could be possible to send someone backwards in time if they were frozen at absolute zero. I think. The old man then finally plucks up the courage to kill her, and he jabs her with the needle that causes her to freeze. However, having had a trial run on Yoni, Scully manages to bring back Lisa. While this is going on, Jason figures out where his elderly self would go, and he travels to the lab where they did most of their research. He's currently researching their work and explains why he's come back to destroy it. He says once time travel is invented, that everyone knows everything that's happened and will ever happen. Because of this, the past, present, and future all end up existing at once, because from people's point of views, they can go between them all at will. However, in doing this, everyone loses history and their optimism for the future. People lose hope for certain things, their religions, their faith, and basically the world's ruined. So he's come back to stop it. But the pair end up fighting because of what he did to Lisa, and again, I'm telling you, Rian Johnson was taking notes. Mulder then arrives to tell them that Lisa's alive, but upon hearing it, the old man says that it's better that they never were. So, kind of a reverse of It's a Wonderful Life. He then wraps his arms around himself, and the pair then both burst into flames. So yeah, pretty heavy, and we end with quite a poignant speech by Mulder. Throughout the entry, he's constantly argued with Scully over the physics of time travel, and it turns out she even wrote a thesis on the subject. This ended up discussing the multiverse and how there's an amount of infinite universes that burst out from every choice. However, Mulder theorizes that means that every universe we find ourselves in must be the one that produces just one outcome. So for example, if one choice leads to time travel being created, then that is the universe where time travel is created. Does that make sense? So this is always going to be the world where time travel is invented, as Jason proves that this is the outcome of that path. Chillingly, it's here that we cut to Lisa and watch her working away on the newly discovered compound that the future Jason helped her discover. So yeah, excellent way to close things out, and as a big fan of time travel stories, I really enjoyed this. Apparently they also looked at lots of different scientific papers and read over things in theoretical physics. They were also inspired by Robert Oppenheimer, who was outspoken about his invention of the atomic bomb. They loved this idea of a scientist who regretted their creation and wondered what would happen if they had the chance to change things. This idea of knowing how things would turn out would also in turn into the state of the future. Does that make sense? Just like Jason though, people would be cursed with knowledge and humanity would change across the board because we'd no longer have the same outlook. Something I found absolutely fascinating, and though its concepts probably better than the execution overall, I feel this is a really memorable story. Episode 20 though is Small Potatoes.
Otherwise you're just small potatoes.
Say that again?
But it's a banger! Written by Vince Gilligan, it stars Darren Morgan in one of the show's funniest episodes. Morgan's been a cracking writer throughout the series, and he's brought so much brevity to the show. So this episode feels like the perfect place to have him in front of the camera, and the guy absolutely kills it. We begin with a pregnant woman being rushed into labour, and upon pulling the baby out, we see it's been born with a tail. Turns out this is a common occurrence in the town, where 5 babies have been born with a similar affliction, or similar positive thing. I will not judge after seeing Shallow Hal, but Mulder and Scully are brought in to find out why, and it takes them to the local fertility doctor. It's here that you initially suspect that the doctor's been inseminating all the women using the same sperm, which didn't belong to the fathers. Now, having seen that Netflix documentary where it was revealed that something like this happened in real life, that's immediately where my mind wandered to. There's actually 2 massive cases where this happened in real life, which were documented in The Man with 1,000 Kids and also Our Father. In both, we follow the discovery that a fertility doctor's impregnated thousands with his own sperm, and this led to a lot of complications. They all developed similar diseases, and there was the worry that 2 kids could even end up in an incestuous relationship because they were unaware that they were actually related. At the clinic, Mulder comes across a janitor named Eddie Van Blunt, who's played by Morgan. Upon pulling his pants down, he notices he's got a scar above his butt, which indicates that the character had a tail. Now, my initial suspicions weren't the case, and it turns out that Eddie can shapeshift. Upon being arrested, he transforms into a cop and manages to make it out the precinct. The agents then go to question Eddie's father. He says that he was a circus performer who still has his tail, and try to convince Eddie it was actually something that made him special. So yeah, your mind starts to wander another way, but he then slips up and calls Fox Mulder by name. And yep, the curveball comes in the fact that this is also Eddie posing as his dad. So he does a run and transforms into a mother's husband, and then it all falls into place with how the kids are his. However, the actual husband returns home, and thus Eddie then changes into Mulder. Now this is where the episode really kicks it up a notch, and after he traps Mulder, he tries to take over his life. The guy has some absolutely classic scenes, like sitting at Fox's desk looking at all the shit in the office.
Good night. This is where my tax dollars go?
We also have him trying to bluff his way through reports, and Duchovny gets a real chance to flex his comedic chops.
Which one of you wrote this?
I did, sir.
You spelled Federal Bureau of Investigation wrong.
It's a typo.
I think it's just a joy to watch, and seeing Duchovny have a laugh throughout the episode just makes it one of my favourites.
You looking at me? There ain't nobody else here. You must be looking at me.
Now, Eddie gets to take on some of the more personal moments of Mulder's life as well. Arriving at Scully's house, he brings up how the pair never actually talk. Like, talk. Over a bottle of wine, they both pour their hearts out, and then this all builds up to a kiss. However, just before it happens, the real Mulder busts in, and Eddie reverts back to his actual form. But I do like how this kind of plays with what the audience are pining for, and it does show that the pair could end up together if the timing was right. Also, yeah, I know that there's probably like some really sinister read on this too, because he's manipulating Scully. He isn't Mulder, but just let me believe, mate. I want to believe. Anyway, Eddie's arrested and given muscle relaxants, which stop him from being able to change his shape. Mulder then visits him, and Eddie says he was born a loser, whereas Mulder's a loser by choice. Think it's kind of the push that he needs to maybe step away from being so focused on the X-File, and that his work-life balance just doesn't exist. Although Mulder may have not been having fun, I certainly was, and this is a real standout in a season of standouts. Gilligan said he was actually getting a bit sick of just being known for his dark writing, and instead wanted to show he could actually do comedy. He certainly succeeds as well, and it kinda lays the groundwork for his more comedic stuff in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Where we go next though isn't as fun as this one. That is Zero Sum, which centers around Skinner having to pay his debt. Turns out the syndicate killer bees have managed to escape, and he's been brought in to tidy things up.
Bees to the car! Bees everywhere!
Throughout the episode, he uses Mulder's credentials to cover up the crimes and gets the agent further into trouble. However, on the flip side of this, Mulder's investigating who framed him and working alongside Skinner to uncover the truth. The episode is such a tense entry as the audience are in on what's going on, but Mulder has absolutely no idea, and you're gripped by what's going to happen when it all blows up. It really adds some moral weight to Skinner's choice before as well, and shows the outcome of his deal with the devil. Mitch Pileggi is fantastic as well, and he grapples with lying to his allies while working for the bad guy. However, as we know, this is also that he can help his friend, so yeah, it's the perfect moral quandary. He even threatens to expose the syndicate when things get heated up, and you get the feeling he's willing to give himself up to bring the others down. But things look like they're covered up, with Smoking Man taking the last wasp to the syndicate. But as per usual, mate, whenever Smoking Man is like, clean it up, the lad hasn't actually cleaned it up. We get a scene where the bees swarm a playground and a kid gets caught in the crossfire. He ends up losing his glasses and scrambling around for them, and yeah, I got a lot of flashes of Macaulay Culkin in My Girl. That was the first time I vividly remember a character dying in a movie, and I couldn't help but link the two, especially with the glasses and the bees. It was the most traumatic moment of my life. Who plays a big role here though is Laurie Holden's Marita, and she comes across as a bit more duplicitous. She knows that Skinner's up to no good, but is willing to keep things stum so they don't get in further trouble. Eventually, Mulder realizes Skinner was behind things and confronts him, suspecting he's been working with the baddies this entire time. However, he says that though he told him not to work with Smoking Man, he unfortunately didn't listen to his own advice. He ends up confronting the baddie, angry that Scully hasn't been cured. However, he says that things are all falling into place, And if he kills him, then Scully will never be free of her cancer. Skinner then fires off a warning shot, and we end with Marita being instructed by the Syndicate to tell Mulder whatever he wants to hear, lays the groundwork for things to come, and also builds off the two-faced nature of the episode. Now going into this, I was a bit like, oh mate, not another fucking Killer Bees one, because don't know why, I always found that stuff goofy. And I'm actually quite interested to see if I enjoy the film more than I did back in the day, now being more used to the Syndicate and the Bee stuff and the alien stuff as well. I just think the way they use Skinner to cover things up though is excellent, and it's great seeing the whistleblower dilemma that Skinner has to deal with. The episode was actually written out of necessity as well, as Anderson had to go and shoot scenes for the Mighty. They also wanted to give Duchovny a bit of a break, and thought now would be the perfect time to do a Skinner-centric episode. So he really takes the reins and becomes even more interesting. Now, there's an unwritten rule in writing reviews that you avoid saying the term mixed bag. So we'll say Elgie is a bag that's mixed. The storyline itself is pretty meh, but Scully has some outstanding scenes with her therapist where she talks about Mulder. Scully is asked why she's still going to work when she's been diagnosed with terminal cancer. However, she says that Mulder's become a part of her life that drives her, and their friendship is what makes her push on the fight to survive. I think it's a really great study on how having strength and wanting to fight is half the battle, and that Mulder does far more for her than just being her partner. When it comes to the story though, bit all over the place. And we begin with a bowling alley and meet a man with autism called Harold Muller. Sent home by his boss, the boss then sees the body of a dead girl at the end of the alley. Upon going outside, he then notices police and runs over to tell them about what he saw. However, upon getting there, he sees they're inspecting the body of the dead girl he's just seen. The agents are brought in, with Mulder suspecting that these are spirits of dead girls attempting to communicate with the living. They discover "She is me" written in wax at the back of the bowling alley, and learn the police became aware of this because of a tip-off. That was anonymous, but they did say "She is me" during the call. Now throughout the episode, Harold becomes the suspect, and we learn that he sees the ghosts of the dead girls. Scully also witnesses them as well, but she chalks this up as the mental pressures of dealing with cancer. Personally, I think it's because these are omens of death, which appear when someone's close to passing away. At the start of the video, we talked about, figures standing at the bottom of people's beds, and I actually did have a family member who just before they died said they experienced a similar thing. The Mothman is also supposed to appear before a major tragedy goes down, and this idea was adapted in the film The Mothman Prophecies, which also had characters dying and returning at the bottoms of beds and shit. But yeah, writer John Chaban said he came up with it when he visited his wife's dying father in hospital, and he kept looking around the room almost as if he was seeing other people. The father even apparently asked who else was there with them, even though they were the only people there. So he wondered if people who are close to death might be able to see through the cracks of reality into the next world. Upon suspecting Harold, they start to investigate the psychiatric centre where he lives at, and it's at this point that we meet Nurse Innes. Innes says that working here is enough to send you crazy, and she's basically a Nurse Ratched type figure. She bullies Harold, and we learn she's murdered the women because of something that happened with her husband. Her husband actually ran off with a younger lady, and Innes has thus been killing them as a sort of twisted revenge. Innes fakes an attack and says that Harold hit her, but when Scully questions her, she attacks her in the bathroom. After shooting her, Mulder then says Harold died of apnea because someone had taken away his medication. Harold's become the nurse's final victim, and it's quite a cruel, overly dour way to end the episode. I actually wrote this section and then went to go do my research and came across lots of different reviews, and I think people in general just didn't like how down it was. The whole episode revolves around murdered women, which just leads to more death. Plus, we close out with Scully going to her car and then noticing Harold in the rearview mirror. Upon turning around, the character's disappeared, but this omen of death clearly sticks with the character. So yeah, a bit of a downer, and that takes us to episode 23, which is called Demons, and it deals with Fox's sister. We open with Mulder having a dream of his childhood where he witnesses his mum and dad arguing. In the episode, he has vivid flashbacks of the past and slowly uncovers the truth about his father. Written by R.W. Goodwin, he came up with the idea after reading The Landscape of Dreams. This explored the notion that one could perfectly remember their childhood, however, most repress it, and it's only through dreams that our subconscious seeps in. Now, I'm not sure how accurate that is, but it helps Mulder uncover his past. Waking up in a hotel covered in blood, he's then found by Scully and learns he's been missing for several days. His gun's also been shot twice, and he has keys belonging to a couple named David and Amy. He's trying to fill in the blanks, and I love how this mirrors him trying to learn about the past. Eventually, they're led to his parents' summer home, and this is what the couple, David and Amy Cassandra, had been painting. Inside, they find the pair dead from 2 gunshot wounds, and Mulder has flashbacks of his parents arguing, with a cigarette-smoking man being there as well.
You're the spy.
Now, Mulder is of course a suspect in their murder, but eventually he's cleared. They learn that Amy had been abducted though, and that she'd been taking drugs to try and recover her memories. Turns out that this is something Mulder's been trying as well, and he goes back to his mother. Here he confronts her about handing over Samantha, and they sort of change things from the previous revelations. Mulder clearly suspects his mother was involved with it, and thinks that Tina might have given up Samantha. At this point, he also suspects the smoking man's his dad, and though Tina doesn't confirm it, it's all falling into place. Sadly though, I think where Demons falls down is its inability to give answers. These are all questions that have been touched upon before, but the episode never confirms them out and out. Plus, the mystery just isn't that interesting, and thus you get an episode that feels like a bit of a retread. He does get put in a hypnosis machine that looks really cool, especially with the goggles though, but other than that, not really worth watching. I think had this given us answers to something to at least satisfy some of our curiosities, then it would have taken it up a notch, but yeah, as it doesn't, just not consequential, mate. Got a bit cockney there. So yeah, we've got an episode where Mulder gets out of jail, doesn't learn the truth, and we end with nothing really being solved. Sadly, that's kind of the feeling that I have with the finale as well, which is where we head next. I think it's probably the worst finale out of the 4 so far, but I did actually sit with it for a couple of days, and I think I've settled on it a bit more. It's got some great cinematography and feels like a massive step up in terms of production, and it offers a lot of philosophical questions. Now we kick things off in a big way with Scully going to Mulder's apartment. The police are there along with a body on the floor, which Scully confirms is Mulder. And dun dun dun! From this point, he then goes to testify, and we learn about how we got here in the first place. Jumping back, way back into time, we see as a frozen alien's body is discovered in the Canadian mountains. There's a couple of trips to this throughout the episode, and apparently it was one of the most costly sets in the entire show. They supposedly refrigerated an entire building using real snow and ice, and it really helps to add to the effect. Eventually, DNA is sent to Mulder, which seems to confirm that aliens exist, and Scully's also attacked by a mysterious figure. He works for the Department of Defense and is called Michael, and actually becomes a big part of the episode. We also finally get to meet Scully's brother, who eventually learns that she's been suffering from cancer. He's pretty mad, it's all been kept secret, and she's been getting beaten up at work. But it's an anger that comes from the right place, and he tries to talk her out of going back to work. But we wouldn't have a show otherwise, mate. Now, if the mountain won't go to Mulder, then Mulder will go to the mountain, and he travels there with a team's leader named Professor Alinsky. They discover the rest of the exposition dead, except for a man named Babbitt. He buried the corpse to hide it, and with it in reach, the gang then perform an autopsy. They agree that the creature is genuine, but an assassin arrives and kills both Babbitt and Alinsky. This is Scott Ostelhoff, who's the right-hand man of the First Elder. He's the one who killed the rest of the team, and actually lives in the apartment above Mulder. Small world, that. Nah, it's all on assignment, and he's been given that home to keep eyes on the agent, which is such a cool reveal. Even if he hasn't really been in the show before. And yeah, I did kind of wish that they'd had the hindsight to kind of layer him throughout all 4 seasons, but I'll talk about how he plays a bigger role next season, as he is a key cog in the machine. Now, eventually, Mulder and Scully meet with Michael, who basically lays out everything to the agents. He tells them that the government operates on lies, but that none of them exist in the realm of the supernatural. Instead, they create a bigger lie to cover the lies, and have been faking everything to do with aliens. Samantha's abduction was faked, along with Scully's cancer, and she was given this disease to make it seem like the aliens were real. These hoaxes cover the government's actions, and Mulder's basically been wasting his time studying the X-Files. But I don't know about that, mate. He discovered like Adrian Toomes and shit. What? Aliens is like one part of the show. But like me, Mulder's in denial that he's been wasting his time covering this series. This is something the series has of course covered before though, with every season having an episode where they're like, Mulder, you mug. We just fake stuff to make idiots believe it, you mug. But this is where we sort of leave things, and we close out with Mulder watching a debate about the existence of aliens. Sat there crying, he's clearly lost hope, and we then jump to Scully at the testimony who says Mulder took his own life. So yeah, very, very dour way to end the season, and I've seen lots of complaints about how we close things off with it all seeming pointless. Like I said as well, it's something I've sat with overall, and I do think I edge towards liking it more than I don't. However, I can totally understand why, we were 4 seasons deep and then we just get told that all this stuff with aliens, it's all a waste of time. What do you mean it's all a waste of time in general? But when creating it, the team wanted to basically have a debate over the quote-unquote existence of God and kind of focus on what happens to people who have faith in something that they can't prove exists in a tangible way, and ultimately, they start to doubt it. The name Gethsemane, which is what the episode's called, and I've also butchered, that's actually a nod to the Bible as well, and this is the name of the garden where Jesus was betrayed by Judas. Even the tagline for the entry is changed to believe the lie, which appears in the credits instead of the truth is out there. In the end, Mulder ultimately has his faith tested, and it seems like he doesn't win. Now, because of that, I did actually wonder if there were plans to have Duchovny step back. The entry was actually shot just 2 weeks prior to his marriage to Tia Leone, who is of course a big actor in her own right. Knowing he would return, I did wonder if reports of that might have been brushed to the side, but it's just something that I contemplated while watching the ending. But yeah, that's where we end things, with the series kind of going out on a couple of dull notes. I do feel like there's been some bangers in this season though, and yeah, some of those early entries were absolutely stellar. Now so far, I'd probably prefer season 3 overall, but I think some of the episodes in season 4 are better than season 3's. Does that make sense? Like I said, there's some absolute all-timers in here that are definitely worth checking out. Either way, thank you for watching the video, and I'll of course be back to break down season 5. Please drop a like as well, and drop a comment with all your thoughts below, and if you want to follow us on Instagram, then make sure you check us out at Heavy Spoilers. Also, I'm getting lots of questions like, when can I see the next video? Well, did you know, these videos are dropped early for members. So if you've got that itch to watch the next big breakdown, you will get it early for just 99 cents a month by clicking that join button. Yes, I know it costs money, but when you think about it, that's less than $12 a year, that's less than 3 cups of coffee a year, and these big 90-minute long breakdowns, you're getting like one of those a week, every week, for 52 weeks. It's amazing, it's great value. So yeah, huge thank you to everyone who does that, and with that out of the way, thank you for watching this video. I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.